Okay, so let's start with the basic button. So now we're going to use a text tool, the text tool, to create this button. You could use the state button, but you'll see that this is a very easy, straightforward way, and it's very manageable as well. The way we'll start using state buttons later on in this course, but let's start with very basic. So we're just going to use the text tool, and I'm just going to type the word button in there. Now, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some spacing and padding. So let's say 12 pixels of padding here in the spacing panel here, so we can see we've got 12 pixels of padding. Then if I just move this down, this should all bounce into place, and we can see that we've got this line under here that's telling us that the box is a little bit small for the text padding that we've got here. So let's change the text alignment as well to centered. Then I'm just going to make the height 42, and you can see that that dotted line is removed. Now we can also add a fill color, so let's choose this green, and we'll make the actual button text white. So just to recap on what we've done here, we've just used the text tool, we've created a text box, we've added some padding, and we've changed the background fill color and the text color. So now we have a very basic button. So if we hit preview, we can see here that the button looks pretty good, but I think that the distance here doesn't look quite right. I think that the bottom distance looks a little bit too tall. It looks odd. So what I'm going to do is switch the link icon off here, which disconnects all of these padding items and allows us to change the padding. So I'm just going to change the bottom padding here down to 10 pixels, and if we refresh now, so I've just gone back into preview, I've left it open and I've hit refresh. Now that looks nice and neat to me. Okay, now once we have our button here, we can use our text frame states, and we can see that we have our normal state, rollover, mouse down, and active. I'm just going to change the rollover state for the time being. So let's just go into the rollover. So I'm going to select that, and we can see that the text is telling us that we are in the rollover state. And I'm going to change the color to, let's say, this blue color. Let's go back to our preview here and hit refresh. And we can see now that as we put our cursor over the button, it's changing to blue. So now we have a really basic button. There's a couple of other things that we might want to do as well though. We don't want our buttons, the hyperlinks of the buttons, to use those, standard blue, purple and so on colors if we've got a hyperlink on a piece of text here. So I'm just going to go into my hyperlinks, and this is a trick that you can use when you're building sites to make sure that your hyperlinks don't, once you're on publish, all of a sudden take these color styles on, unless you want them to, of course. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch all of the underlining off, and let's make our hyperlink colors here all transparent. What that will mean is that the hyperlink then will just take on whatever the colors are of the text at that point in time. We could add other styles, but we're just going to switch them all off for now. The other thing we want to do is we want to make sure that when our cursor hovers over the button, we want it to show the pointer, the finger pointer, to let people know that this is clickable. So for the time being, instead of connecting it to any page, let's just put in a hash in there. And you can see it says HTTP and a hash there. So now let's go back to our preview and refresh. And you can see that we have the pointer there now. Okay, great. So we're making good progress with this button now. Now we could also add a mouse down state. So that's when somebody clicks on the button and then the active state, so if this button is active. But in the most part, buttons very often just have a normal and rollover state. What we will do though is for this particular item, let's just choose a red here and go back to our refresh here. We can see blue, and then when we click, we've got red. Okay, so we've got green to start off with, then blue, and then red on the click. Let's go back into our text frame states here, and we can see that we have this option for a transition. Now what the transition does is it sets up a fade between each button state. So if we just switch it on the default here, and we'll leave it on easing, and go back into our refresh here, we can see that now our button, instead of it just going on and off between the blue, we can see it fades in and fades out again. And then if we click, you can see it faded in, and you can see it just fading in slowly. So that's a really nice, we can use that to our benefit. But for the time being, we're going to switch this off. We don't need a transition because we just want it to be that on and off state. Now that we have that button, let's see what we can do. So I'm going to press Alt and drag. So I'm going to create another button here. And on this particular button, I'm just going to change the radius. So I'm going to put a radius of 10. Now make sure that you're in the normal state, because when you're in the normal state, whatever you do here will apply to all of these other states as well. So let's just change that to, let's change that to 10. So now if we hit our preview, we have our two buttons. We have a square button and we have one with rounded corners. So we've already created two buttons now. Now let's iterate again, and let's change that to 50. And we get this pill button type. So now if we refresh again, we now have our three buttons here, and we have this square, round cornered, and a pill button. So these are really simple to produce. Now let's take a look at why this is beneficial to use the text button. Well, by using this text button in this particular way, if we create another button here, and I'm going to drag it out to it's slightly bigger here, and we can type in here, click here to download. Now, because we are using a text frame and we've added padding to it, everything retains its shape, its size, its colors, its rollover states. All of those are included, but we can make this button any size we like, and everything will stay nice and neat. And that's really useful for when you're building quickly. We could change the text size, and we would need to just up the spacing, the dimensions, the height here, and let's drag that out a bit. And now if we preview again, refresh, we can see that now we've got a much bigger button, but everything remains, it keeps its styling, and it still looks like a good button. We can obviously change the font here by selecting the button, choosing our text, and then choosing a different text. So let's say, for instance, let's change the text so that it's very easy to do. So these are the most basic buttons you can do, but once you get started with this, it's amazing what you can build from these. Let's delete that one. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to create what's called ghost buttons. So these are where you have a nice outline of the button, and then you can either have the hover state to go into a different colored line, or you can go into a solid button. So let's just drag all three of those down. So I'm pressing Alt and dragging those three buttons down, and whilst they're all selected, we're going to add a 1 pixel border to them all, and we're going to switch the text to, we'll switch the text off, the background fill off rather than just white. We'll switch it to transparent, and now we're going to go into our text color and we're going to choose that same green. So now we have this ghost button style. Now when you have a border on the ghost button style like this, you need to make sure that you add it to the other states as well, otherwise you get an odd action being carried out. So we're going to have to now make some modifications in the different states. So first of all, I'm going to go into the rollover state, and I'm going to choose that I want the text to be white. We're also going to make sure that we can see here that the stroke color is the green, so we want to make that blue again so it matches up. Let's go into our red. So we can see that the red is, because we've changed the text color here, it's cascading down and that's been applied, but we can see now that the red one has got the blue button stroke, so we're going to just apply the red there. So now if we preview, let's refresh, now we have these ghost buttons, and we can see that we have that that nice effect happening going from the outline to the fill color. Now you can see on these buttons, because we haven't changed the stroke or the button color, they look a bit odd. So let's go back and change those. So let's select both of those. Let's go to our normal, our rollover state, sorry. Let's choose our text, go to the white, and we'll choose the blue here. And let's go to our red one here. We've got the text color. Let's just make sure that that is that red color there. Okay, so now all of those buttons, and let's also add the transition to this as well. So let's put a fade in there, and we're adding it to the normal state, so that will cascade down. Let's put that as a 0.4. So we've just got, it's a bit of a quicker fade on it. Okay, and let's refresh and take a look at these buttons. So now we've got that nice fade in between each state. So these are just on and off. These are those nice fade in between each state. So now we've got 6 buttons. Now these buttons, we could add these to a library and reuse them, save them out and reuse them whenever we need buttons. Let's create some more buttons with these now. So I'm going to take this set here and drag this down. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make these buttons feel a little bit more, rather than the flat design, let's make them pop out from the page a little bit. We can do that very easily with a gradient. So I'm just going to choose the fill here, and I'm going to choose gradient and switch it to a vertical gradient. And we've got that light green at the top. So let's go to this, we'll leave the light green that we've got there. And then the base color, let's choose a darker green. So we can see now that these buttons feel that they're a little bit more popping off the screen, lifting off the screen. So let's go to our rollover state here, and where we've got the blue and green. Now you might like that, but let's just make this, let's go with a darker blue there. And then let's go down to our red fill color. And let's choose this deep red here, and we'll just make it a little bit darker. Okay. So now if we take a look at this preview now we've got that nice gradient on there, and it just feels like the buttons popping off the page a little bit more. Let's add a bit more to these buttons now, and let's just drag these down. And what we're going to do now is let's switch our fade transitions on 0.4, and in our effects panel we can actually add some more effects to these buttons to make them pop off the screen even more, if you want them to feel even more like buttons. So we can do things like switch on the shadow, and let's change the shadow to be directly below the button. So we'll change that to a 90-degree angle. Let's bring our distance up a little bit and bring our blur a bit, so that we can it just feels like it's lifting off the page. Now in our normal state, what we want to happen here is we want the buttons to feel like they're moving off the page when we hover over them. So I'm going to set this opacity to 1. Now the reason why I'm doing that is because from the normal state to the hover state, you need to ensure that there's a shadow there in the first place, so that the transition can happen from there being no shadow to there being some shadow. So if you had the shadow switched off completely, then it doesn't look right. So what we're going to do is just put a 1% opacity, so you can't even see it. And then we'll go to our hover state, and we'll go back to our effects. And now what we're going to do is let's say 50. That may be a bit dark, but let's add 50 there, and let's add some more blur, and let's put a little bit of distance on it as well, just so that we can really see the effect. Let's go into our preview here and refresh, and we can see, we should be able to see. Hang on one moment. Let's make sure that we've got this. So we've got our normal here, we've got our hover state. Yep. Let's just switch the fade off for a moment and go into preview and refresh. Okay, so now you can see that the buttons are really popping off the page. So whereas we have just a color change here in the fade, now we've got the buttons actually feeling like they're lifting off the page. Now we can do even more with these buttons. Let's take another set down here, and let's go into our effects and switch the bevel on. And you can see now that the bevel, this feels a little bit like 10 years ago design-wise, but you can see that the bevel is there. So let's just preview those and refresh them again. So now we've got them really coming off the page. So you can see here that we've taken just that very simple text button and we've taken it and iterated it into all these different button types using the effects panel, using the gradients, and we can create lots of different types of buttons. So that's the basic premise of building buttons. And by using the text frame with the spacing, it means that we can keep the consistency, and they're very easy to manage when we want to change the text in the buttons, or the size is very easy to manage. So that's how to build the very basic buttons. Now let's move on to our next set of buttons.